Welcome to the last talk of the day, which was supposed to be the first talk of the day, but shit happens, so now I'm here, and that's what matters, right? My name is Ed, and I'm going to give a somewhat personal talk. It's about teaching and learning, but it's also about imposter syndrome and my grandma. And a lot of very personal stories and a lot of other people, and I normally don't give personal talks because I go on stage and open conferences or I talk about web components or whatever. But, you know, if it helps someone, even if it's personal, then what the hell, let's go for it. So I organize conferences, I give talks, and I'm also an engineer, which is important to begin with because the next thing I'm going to tell you usually makes people doubt my qualifications. So let's get qualifications out of the way first. I'm an engineer. I work as a CTO in a small startup in Berlin that also has offices here in Poland, so I'm in Poland quite a lot. I love it. And I wrote a lot of code throughout my career. Some of that code is open source. Some of that code is used in production systems. Some of that code keeps the lights on in Netflix data centers. So, a lot of stuff. And now, the next thing. I don't have a computer science degree. I don't actually have any kind of degree. And, well, it makes some people assume I'm not a real engineer. I'm like, yeah, you're an engineer, but you're not for real, right? You didn't spend 5 years in university, or 4, or 6. I spent 0 years in university. I actually was homeschooled the last year of high school as well, which basically means, well, if you try to homeschool a 16-year-old, you know that there is no actual learning happening in the process. There's also a very special group of people that says, oh, but then maybe you're a front-end engineer. So yeah, there is this assumption that front-end engineers are not real engineers, and you know, fuck those people. I actually started as a front-end engineer, and you know, some people see Freddy Krueger in their nightmares. I see Internet Explorer 6.0. So let's make a time jump. I was born and raised in Siberia, and the year I finished high school was 2009. As I said, I was homeschooled, and it means that instead of spending a year actually learning, I spent a year tinkering with computers, and I got my first job around that time. And it was like a very junior job. It wasn't even a job that's like, oh, he's a junior engineer, so he's going to become a real engineer someday. It was more of a job like, well, we're too lazy to write a bash script, so let's hire a guy from Siberia instead. So it's not a great beginning of a career, but you know, it is what it is. And by some miracle, I actually got admitted into university. I faked my way through exams, and yay, here it was. And I was like, okay, that's great. I went there, I got my coursework for the semester, and as you can imagine, universities in Siberia aren't that great. So I opened a bunch of books at random, and I was like, yeah, okay, Turbo Pascal. Amazing. Amazing stuff. But you know what? I'd rather just do my job instead. So I never went back. My university education lasted about 1 day. Which is actually quite unfortunate, because I come from a family of engineers. My dad is an engineer. He works with oil and construction, and you know, a real engineer, not a software engineer. My grandma is an engineer, and my grandma was actually very upset that I'm not going to get a degree, because she's not just an engineer. She genuinely thinks that if I'm not an engineer, I am not a good member of society. I should not be let out of my house until I get that degree. I'm an embarrassment for the family. And you know, when you're getting told something repeatedly, 40 times a day, whenever you visit grandma, you kind of start believing it. So I spent the first few years without my degree thinking that I am probably kind of stupid for, you know, not getting it. Which was sad, like, it gets to you. And I didn't get any confirmation otherwise. I mean, my mom told me I'm smart, but it's not exactly an objective and unbiased verification of my intellectual capacity, right? So I spent some time wondering, why am I not a good fit for this? Maybe I should have learned Turbo Pascal, and like a couple years later I would get to the good stuff. So instead I just kept working and, you know, learning things online and talking to people instead. And it turned out that my mom might have been right, and I am not very stupid after all, because apparently not everyone has a degree. Even in my circles, even in my field, and apparently some people who do find it pretty useless. And they told me, well, there is a better way to spend 4 years. And you can definitely get a good job without having a degree in a lot of great companies. And that's amazing. And I was like, okay, wait a minute, hold up. So people spend 4 years doing this. And some people don't, and they get the same job. And that's kind of weird. First of all, if people don't get this degree, how do they learn? What do they do instead? And second of all, is it really just wasting 4 years of your life, or is there actually any use in it? Right? Because, well, we're trying to be scientific and actually find the reason for it. And it turns out that to realize and to figure out how universities actually came to be, we have to make one more time jump. And this one is going to be 2 centuries back to the beginning of the 19th century, when the Industrial Revolution started. And the Industrial Revolution was pretty great, because you had a lot of people working manually with their hands, getting tired and, you know, dying and being overworked because nobody had 8-hour work weeks back then. And suddenly you got all these amazing machines, and people could work using machines and become more productive and actually work less. And the problem is somebody had to teach people how to use machines, and somebody had to teach people how to build machines and, you know, come up with new ones and make them more efficient. And it couldn't be done through our traditional methods of learning, which was kind of an apprentice relationship, right? Because it required too much time and too much commitment, and when your master taught you, well, they didn't just get a lot of time to do it, they actually had to work. So there was this massive demand for workforce. And, well, people turned to universities because universities at that time were the only model of higher education that could scale. And before the Industrial Revolution, every university was this research facility, right? Kind of like some of the universities are now, except all of them. And people didn't necessarily realize it, because from the outside, it looks like, well, we get a bunch of people, we put them in a university, 5 years pass, smart people come out. Yay! Let's fix all our problems by building more universities and making more smart people come out. So this is how we got where we are. This is how we got to a lot of universities, still not all of them, but a lot, actually teaching practical skills instead of science and research. And in some countries, there is this distinction between universities and colleges, In some countries there are none. I don't know how it is in Poland. But mostly, if you go to a university in Siberia, you're probably going to get something practical out of it. And in some cases, you will end up actually being a scientist and going to academia for years and years and years. But it started to change around that time. And the one thing universities didn't care about, but they should now, is people's motivation. Because it's 19th century, and going to a university is your sometimes only chance of not dying out of starvation or diseases or just not having enough to feed your family. So I would say you were pretty motivated. Not dying is a very good stimulus. And so traditionally universities didn't really motivate people. It was lectures, and it was professors, and it was someone just saying words at you. And that's kind of it. You were supposed to motivate yourself, and you were supposed to learn yourself because you didn't really have an alternative. And now you do, because the world has changed. You have internet, you have online courses, you have a lot of stuff to actually teach yourself. And if your university sucks, you can just go out, never come back again, and do your own thing, which is great. And then some of the jobs became really fast-paced and fast-changing, right? Software engineering. There is a new hot framework every month, new hot programming language every year. So no way a university can actually keep up with that. And again, we're back to this situation where you just cannot give people any practical skills because they become outdated as soon as people actually graduate. And obviously for some professions and for some fields, it's still important. And some knowledge doesn't go out of date. And it's easy to imagine a coding bootcamp for software engineers, but it's not so easy to imagine a bootcamp for nuclear scientists. And it's easy to learn Python by doing Python, but it's not a good idea to learn open heart surgery by doing open heart surgery. So nobody's saying universities are not important. But the common consensus now in 2018 is that it is important, just not for everyone. And even though it's kind of a common consensus in my circles, there is a data and there is a metric called gross enrollment ratio, which is basically a ratio of people enrolled in a university to people of some assumed student age. And what do you expect to see there? If we begin to realize that universities are not for everyone and some people don't need them, we would expect to kind of see a decline, maybe a small decline, but still. And apparently that's not what's happening at all, because it's growing, and it's actually growing for a lot of reasons that I will not get into, but it's a lot of social pressure, it's a lot of just inertia, it's a lot of course, universities being actually useful for some people. But the point is, there is this notion still of a person without a degree not being a worthy employee, or in case with my grandma, not being a worthy human being. So, okay, we have all this, and hold up. A lot of people actually need universities, right? But also a lot of people don't. And as engineers, we all kind of want to optimize stuff and make stuff better for as many people as we can. And in this case, how do we actually do that? Can we make it better for people who did go to universities but didn't have to? or for people who are about to. So I'm an engineer, and I know many other engineers, and I definitely know that some of them don't need a degree and can do things they would learn in 4 years much, much faster. So, you know, it's decided I'm going to help people, and how am I actually going to do that? Well, I started doing conferences, eventually. And conferences are amazing. They are great. I don't have to tell you, you are at one right now. And people are usually way, way more motivated when they come to a conference. Some of them actually pay money to go. And, you know, conferences are always up to date. They are on point. And even if the talk is bad, or especially if the talk is good, nobody's going to talk about Turbo Pascal. Even at the worst ever conference, nobody is going to teach you stuff that's 5 years old or 10 years old. I mean, people will just break out their best collection of Rotten Tomatoes and have a go at it. So conferences are great for reaching a large number of people. I can stand here, say words, and you know, there's 150 people in here, give or take. And everyone's listening to me, which is cool. But I'm an engineer and I work in tech and I love data. And one bad thing about conferences and talks is that I actually have none. I know how many people are here, but who actually listens to me? What's the number of people who are going to get something useful out of it? Who is actually going to apply stuff I'm teaching? I have no idea. I can become a better speaker, I can make better jokes, I can have this overwhelming stage presence and insert cool beams into my slides. But again, I have no idea if it worked. And if it actually worked, I have no idea by how much. I have this unknown number of people benefiting from my talk, and then I have this coefficient of becoming a better speaker that's also unknown. And now I have this unknown number multiplied by an unknown coefficient. And, well, I don't know what's happening. So that's the disadvantage of talks, right? There's very few actionable data points, and this is why conferences are not great for building a system of education. You don't collect data, you cannot. Sometimes you can do ratings, you can do reviews, but most of the time it's also not enough, and most conferences just aren't doing it, even though we kind of pride ourselves for being data-driven people. So, do we have alternatives? And if we do have alternatives, can we apply it to talks somehow? And what can we do to collect data? What can we do to just, even without knowing, make talks more efficient in a way that's kind of guaranteed by research or science? And apparently there is, because a lot of smart people who actually went to university also did a lot of interesting research about it. And you know, science is great. You ask a question and somebody already figured it out 50 years ago and published a paper on it. So there is a concept called active learning in traditional education, but also in education in general. And it turns out that most people benefit greatly from doing experiential learning or active learning, which is defined as learning by reflection on doing. It's not necessarily just learning by doing, because you can do the same stuff 50 times and still not learn how it works. But if you do it, and if you think about it, and you consider it, that's how you learn, basically. That's the entire learning process in a nutshell. So any interaction you're performing basically increases your chances of learning something. And it's talking, it's working together, it's debating, it's experimenting. And what's important is that it doesn't have any correlation to how you get your information. It could be talks, it could be video, it could be text, it could be audio. It's just about active versus passive. And again, the problem with talks is that it's mostly passive, right? The speaker is on stage and they are saying words at you for 40 minutes. So the question is, how much better actually is it? And apparently there is a huge meta-study from 2014 that says that active learning techniques in universities increase the chances of success at exams by 55%, which is a lot. Actually, this study concluded by saying that we're not going to test any more of this because only doing passive learning is actually unethical in relation to our test subjects, because we know it sucks. We're not going to do it. We're not going to put people through it. And it's not just one study, it's a meta-study, which means there is over 300 individual researches. And it's not just a fluke. That's how it works. So hold up. If this stuff is so much more efficient, right, 55%, then why aren't we doing it? We're conference organizers, and we want to be data-driven, and we want to optimize stuff. And there is this research that says one thing is 55 more efficient than the other thing. And we're not doing it. And the most important explanation is obviously because talks are scalable, and active learning just isn't. You can do workshops, but how many people can you actually teach through a workshop? You can do 30, maybe 40 if you try hard enough. And with a talk, you can reach hundreds. So, of course, there is this compromise. But now we also have a data that puts in numbers how much more efficient the other thing is. So, FYI, day 2 is a workshop day. Attend the workshop, 55% more efficient, apparently. It's science. And when we have this, and when we think about it, there's also a lot of ways to make talks more efficient and incorporate this element of active learning in it. And one of the examples is something that everyone, literally everyone, tells you when you start going to conferences: take notes. When you take notes, you become engaged in the process, you become more active, you start analyzing, you start getting the gist of it, and you become much more efficient at listening and at learning as a result. So another example is asking questions. When you ask a question, you put yourself into this different mindset, which basically means that you're processing the talk, you're analyzing it, you're not just having some kind of knowledge dumped into your head. And what a lot of people actually do is have this goal for most of the talks they go to. I want to come up with one question for the speaker after the talk. It doesn't matter if you actually ask that question or not. You have to have it in your head. You have to put yourself into this mindset of trying to understand the talk and have one smart question for the speaker afterwards. And this is active learning. Even if you're not actually interacting, you're kind of mimicking it. And it also becomes more effective as a result. But it kind of doesn't seem enough, right? We have this super efficient workshop, and we have this not very efficient talk that we kind of try to fix with crutches to make it a bit more efficient. But still not great. And this has been bugging me for years, kind of. I'm doing conferences, I've been doing it for a while now. And, you know, not great. It's cool that we can reach a lot of people. It's cool that we can learn so much. It's cool that a lot of speakers are just amazing, inspiring people. but how can it compare to the actual knowledge? And how do you actually make it better? And we're making another time jump for this. It's 2015, and if you recognize the picture, it's Las Vegas. And FYI, the story does not involve drinking or gambling. We are conforming to code of conduct here. It's a conference story, and it's also somewhat personal. So a very personal conference story in Las Vegas without gambling or drinking. Here goes. It's a story about how I got my profile picture that I use for conference websites. And I have kind of a silly face. I had a lot of my friends describe my facial expression to me in ways that do not conform to code of conduct, so I'm not going to quote. But it's a very important picture for me. And in a moment, I'll tell you why. So it starts with a conference called DEF CON. And if you don't know what DEF CON is, it's the largest hacker convention in the world. It has around 30,000 attendees for the last few years. It's taken place in Las Vegas, and there is just a lot of incredibly weird people in the most delightful way occupying a huge Las Vegas hotel. And it's really amazing because, well, a lot of it is about information security and, actual hacking, but a lot of it is just about hacking in the wider sense of the word, which basically originally meant people who are just curious about how systems work, how to exploit them, how to make use of them. And essentially, it's a conference that's focused on being curious and on learning stuff and on figuring stuff out. And if you try to Google DEF CON pictures, you will see a lot of pictures of this, but you will not see a lot of pictures of talks, even though they also have talks, very important talks. Most of the novel security research is presented at DEF CON. But for a lot of people, the main point is not just talks or research. It's also just gathering together with thousands of other people and trying to just hack on stuff, figure stuff out, and do puzzles and challenges. Because DEF CON is also famous for a lot of hacking challenges and cryptography puzzles and all that stuff. So most challenges are not something you can just prepare for or Google. It's, again, meant for people to figure out. You get something, you get a cipher, and it's not any of the ciphers that's been in use for any of the observable history. It's more about learning than it is about actual cryptography. It's more about learning than it is about forensics or hacking or traffic analysis. So essentially, it's about how much information you can process and how much you can learn in a very short amount of time. And it's also about how little you can sleep, because if you do more than 4 hours a day, you are not going to do well in the challenge. So DEF CON is a place for 30,000 sleep-deprived hackers in Las Vegas, in 40 degrees outside. It's pretty horrible, if you put it this way, but it's also a lot of fun. So I was really happy when I got there for the first time, because I found a lot of people like me. A lot of people who just learned by being curious about stuff, and not by going to university or doing anything else. And I was learning much more than I would anywhere else, just by doing puzzles and challenges and trying to figure new stuff out, because it's engaging, it's motivating, and it also stimulates you and just makes you do more. And well, 4 hours of sleep at most also help, I guess. So in 4 days of DEF CON, on my first year, I pretty much learned more about information security than I did in, well, all the previous years of my career. And on my second year, I actually won one of the challenges. And, well, as you know, imposter syndrome is a thing for me as well, especially considering my grandma, who still doesn't think I'm an actual human being. So I've always kind of been told that I will not amount to much. And here I was at this huge conference, and, well, you can, you know, have a lot of rational arguments for not actually being stupid, but it's when you have an actual confirmation, then you're like, wow, yeah, maybe I'm actually not. So the picture with my silly face is the picture from the DEF CON closing ceremony receiving an award for a challenge. And it's one of the very few moments of my life when I actually thought that, okay, maybe I'm not stupid, maybe I'm pretty smart. And the way I learn stuff is valid. And not having a degree is good. It's okay. It's acceptable. And, you know, all my attempts to figure out how all this learning and education works have paid off. And so what if I have a silly face? This is one of the happiest moments of my life, actually. So now I use this picture everywhere. And we're going to make one last time jump. This one is just a year after, and it's in Siberia again. Because for all this time, I was very impressed by how much people can actually learn when they don't, in fact, do any actual learning, and when people don't actually do any teaching. And you create this environment, and people just figure stuff out on their own. It's amazing, and it's impressive, and it's also very hard to reproduce. Because there's only a few conferences I know where this is actually happening. So last year we started doing this conference called DevFest Siberia, which is almost like this one, except with 700 people. You know, not many conferences in Siberia, so we don't have strong competition. And I was one of the organizers, and I shared this idea of, you know, having something for people to play with, except for just talks or workshops or whatever it is people usually do at conferences. So it's like a playground. It's an opportunity to build something great and try all this DEF CON stuff on a smaller scale in a conference that's very different. And what we did is we created a conference game that was called Blacklight. And it had a separate website. It was essentially a text-based adventure about going to the conference. And there was a story about stopping a group of criminals. And eventually you start going through this story, you solve challenges, you solve coding puzzles, and it leads you to the conference. And at the conference, you also try out a lot of different stuff. And each puzzle in the game is basically connected to an element of the conference. And you are still going through the story, and you try to stop the bad guys, and it sounds kind of stupid, but people actually get very engaged. And we made a lot of puzzles and challenges with the help of speakers and workshop instructors that basically teach you web debugging, machine learning, cryptography, tracing of transactions on the blockchain. And we also try to encourage people to interact with each other and explore. So we had a badge puzzle. That was a simple idea that actually worked amazingly well. It was also part of the game. When you receive your attendee badge, you don't notice it at first if you're not looking for it, because not all people enjoy puzzles, and it's okay. It shouldn't be in your face, right? But if you pay attention to the background of your badge, you can see that there is an encrypted text on it. And a lot of people actually noticed it pretty much straight away, and then started asking questions, and we tried to keep straight faces. So you take the badge and you try to solve it, and you can't. And then you start talking to other people who are just as clueless as you are, and they can solve it easier. And then you slowly realize that other people having the same badge actually have different text on it. And the main idea that we try to aim for is that this is a puzzle that's impossible to solve alone. Because everyone has a different version, but it's not just a version, it's just a part of one large text. And you have to find at least 3 other people, and you combine it, and then you get your full puzzle. Then you also have to crack it, but by now you have 3 friends and you can get cracking together. And we also try to give badges with the same backgrounds to people who bought tickets in a group, so that they would still have to seek out help from the outside. And there was a lot of those puzzles from other parts of the game, and it was everywhere at the conference. Essentially, the entire conference was the game. And we found out that a lot of people actually prefer to learn this way. We also tried some of the talks into it. For example, we had a machine learning challenge, and it was starting a few minutes after a machine learning talk was over, the TensorFlow introduction. So you turn a talk into this active learning exercise, you finish it, and you immediately apply your knowledge that you just got. So you're playing the game, and it's all this interactive playground for you. It's not just a conference anymore. And we're turning this passive learning into active learning, and we're also chasing the bad guys and breaking into rooms. And there was an actual physical room people were supposed to break into with a lock and lockpicks. I have one of my co-organizers, Leo, and Leo has this intonation sometimes. When I tell him, hey Leo, we need a room at the venue, and people are going to break into it, and they're going to look for a cryptographic pad, and potentially they are going to destroy stuff. And by the way, they are going to break into the room by using actual lockpicks on the actual lock. And we need the venue security to be okay with it. And Leo has this intonation where he says something, but he actually thinks, are you high? But we actually did it, and it was pretty great, and people used lockpicks and broke into a door, and they disabled the security camera by breaking CAPTCHA with a pre-trained TensorFlow model. So they did this entire story that tied into a lot of conference activities, including sponsors. And we also have prizes and stuff. And so far, this was one of the most successful learning experiences we've actually built for people at any conference I've been a part of. So this is pretty much how I see the future of conferences and learning in general. It would be great if it could be this immersive experience. It would be great if it would be a story, if it would not be just a person saying words at you, if it would not be just you going through textbook exercises, if it would be something you can apply, something you can play with, something you can experiment on, something you can engage your community in. And obviously not everyone is into games and puzzles, but still it was way more effective than we anticipated. And you can also get data, because you have this interface in the game, and you see who solved what, how many people solved this, how much time does it take them to go through this, when did they start, when did they finish. And this is an actual system that could scale and potentially become this measurable activity, which is also pretty great, and it would be great if more people did this. So next time you're organizing a conference, maybe try it. And before we finish, let's just do some takeaways on this optimistic note. We're a bit over time, but I think it's okay. It's okay. We're almost done. So, okay, no matter if you're teaching or learning, how do we make it better? To summarize, First of all, you're asking yourself a question. What is the most efficient way to do it? Is it a talk? If it's a talk, then what's your goal? Are you trying to reach as many people as you can? Why is it not a workshop? Why is it not a blog post? If it's a workshop, why is it not a coding exercise? Why is it not an open source project that people can play around with? Because it's important. And as an organizer and as a reviewer, I look through 600 talks a year, give or take. And I reject some of them precisely because of this, because of this medium mismatch. It's a good talk, but it would be much better as something else. So before you actually do anything, is there a better medium for it? Is there a better way for it? That's the most important question here. The second one, the second point, the second takeaway is knowing your audience. Which is also pretty important, and it's pretty obvious when you give talks and when someone coaches you on conference speaking. That's what people always tell you. What's the skill level of people you are teaching? What's their background? At least, you know, roughly. Why are they listening to you? Why wouldn't they listen to someone else at the same time? Do you have to motivate them somehow? Or maybe they are motivated enough even without you. So you should do it extremely well. Your talk and your any kind of learning activity is just at your best when you're talking to people you understand, when you're talking to your people. The third one is motivation, which we already talked about, right? Even if you're extremely good as a teacher, even if you're extremely good as a speaker, nothing will ever happen if your audience isn't motivated to actually learn stuff from your talk. Most likely you have to care about that. You don't really come into a room full of super motivated people. You have to actually give people something. You have to engage them. The next one is more about teaching than it is. It's more about learning than it is about teaching, because that's the best advice for the talks. When you give a talk, or when you listen to a talk, follow up on it. Turn it into this active learning exercise. Take notes, ask the speaker questions, because actually, as a speaker, it's the only data point you can give me. How many people asked questions? How many people understood what I was talking about? How many people liked it? Questions are one of the very few pieces of data I can actually get from it. And questions are actually one of the very few ways you can turn it into an active engagement and learn better from it. So, again, when you try to ask questions, you are putting yourself into this mindset. That means you're analyzing the talk, you're listening to the talk. You're trying to actually figure out what was said and why. And when it comes to active learning, again, and challenges and puzzles, and what can you learn from that is basically you do as little teaching as you can. Because we are all smart people here. There's 150 smart people, and each one can do all the teaching they need on their own, all the learning they need on their own. And you don't really have to lecture someone, or you don't really have to school someone. But when you share your experience, when you just provide the right keywords, when you give some pointers, you can just let people fill in the blanks. And the same applies for workshops. The least efficient workshops are those when the mentor comes and starts typing on your keyboard. You don't learn like this. Someone else just does stuff for you, which also applies to schools and universities as well. And the last one is 3 things you can actually do as a teacher to everyone, no matter if you're experienced or not. No matter if you're good at teaching or not, there is always 3 things you can do. You can engage, encourage, and challenge people. So, look, this is some cool shit. Let's work on that. That's a very simple engagement example. Wow, you are good at it, and it only took you 2 hours. Encouragement, it's simple. You can do it. It doesn't really matter if the person is actually good at it. To be honest, it just can't go wrong. And challenge is, well, the next part. Can you actually do this and that? Can you do it in a different way? Can you do it with a set of constraints? And that stuff is not hard, but it actually helps people learn when you frame it like that. And this goes a very long way. So, okay, let's all get better at teaching and learning. Let's all build better experiences, better conferences, better talks and workshops, degree or not, angry grandmother or not. And I hope you've had a great first day. So when you come here tomorrow, just let's try to apply some of the things we all learned here. And that's it. We do have some time for questions. Yes?
My question is how long you prepare that conference, the DevFest Siberia, actually the game itself? Because to prepare it well, you need to know in ahead a lot of details of the speech and lectures. And I organize a similar conference like 5 years ahead, and I do it a few years ago, iterations of it. But the involvement of the people who want to share the knowledge was like, oh yeah, I can do a lecture, but you will get the materials for it like 2 days before the conference, or they finish it like at the conference. So basically the question is first, how long you take when you start the preparation of the game, and the second one, how to motivate the speakers to prepare the materials a lot before the conference.
So first of all, it took a long time. It took months. We started in May and the conference was in November. And this is also the reason that we're not doing it this year, because I'm not involved with the Fest Siberia, because it took me a lot of time last year, and I actually have, things like a job, because I want to be able to afford food, even though building challenges is great. About speakers, mostly what you need is an outline. You don't really need the entire content of the talk, you don't really need all the slides to kind of build the context around it. You need to know that this is an introduction to TensorFlow. This is what people roughly will learn, and you can build a puzzle. And again, people will just fill in the blanks. If the talk did not cover something, that's better. People actually have an opportunity to learn something else. So it wasn't so bad with the speakers. It did take a lot of time. But the good thing is it's pretty much infinitely scalable and reusable. Even if you have 100 attendees, 500 attendees, 1,000, it doesn't include any actual game mastering. It's just a story that you go through. So that was the good part. The bad part, yes, it did take a few months to build. Probably a bit more than preparing the conference itself.